Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, where we explore how technology is impacting businesses around the world. And today, I'm going to take you all on a trip to the startup nation, or more specifically, Tel Aviv in Israel. And we're going to explore how cloud security orchestration and remediation is a new approach to remediation in the cloud. Because Meny Har is going to join me on the podcast and discuss how it is replacing antiquated and time resource intensive manual processes, and how the approach is automating remediation processes while also ensuring that all the relevant stakeholders are aligned. But before we start today's interview, I just wanted to give a quick mention to our sponsors, because this month the podcast is brought to you by Flipper, which is the #1 marketplace to buy and sell online businesses and startups. So, do you run your own online business? And have you ever considered selling your website, your store, your tech, or your app? Because with world-class combined matching technology, dedicated brokers, and end-to-end services, all at the most efficient price, Flipper is making it simple to sell your online business. So, to get a free valuation, visit my friends at flipper.com/techtalks. where each month thousands of online business owners exit with Flipper. Again, visit flipper.com/techtalks. It's a great story, this one. So buckle up and hold on tight, because no matter where you're listening, I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Tel Aviv, where today's guest is waiting to share his story and also tell us all about Opus Security. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm Meny Har, the CEO of Opus Security. I am 37, just here in Tel Aviv. Until recently lived in New York as well. Most formerly worked in Simplify, which is a security operations company acquired by Google last year. Yeah, and we're here to talk about Opus, which is a new company we're building right now to deal with some other parts of security operations.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to finding out more about Opus in a moment. But before I do, if I was to take you back in time, even before New York and the time you spent there, can you remember where your passion for tech came from, or security, or have those worlds collided, or ultimately what put you on this path that you're on right now?
Sure. So when I look back, I typically think about like 3 milestones, like what I think about led me to where I am today. The first one is just the tech passion itself, which I think came pretty naturally. I had brothers who were pretty much, today I'm much more in tech than them, but back in the day kind of taught me a lot of the basics. And I think I always sensed some affinity to it. So you could see me in the computer for most of my childhood, I think, in a ways. Either it's gaming, sometimes it's coding, different things. And I think that's where I got my basic passion, and just recognizing that tech is something I like to do and I'm pretty good at. As for security, that typically comes for, we have a privilege or sometimes a duty for the Army here. And I think a lot of that came from just being thrust into security in the Army level, and recognize that I do love that field, and it's something that I want to continue to do, and something that I ended up doing. And I started after the Army, I was an officer there, so spent quite a lot of years. And then I ended up in a company here in Israel called Elbit, with defense contractor, which I met just a group of amazing people that ended up spinning up 5 or 6 different startups from that 15-person team. And most of them got acquired, and I think I just saw what could be achieved, and I saw the change that could be made, and I think that led me to, again, at the end of the day, aspiring to do something of my own and thinking about the change I could actually make.
Awesome. And of course, it was that path that would lead you to Opus Security. So what's the story behind the company, and what kind of problems did you set out to solve with technology, or make you stand out in this incredibly crowded market?
So when I think about, security, my background is really about not just detecting attacks or anything that's a more classical. People tend to think about that. We like to think about, or what I've experienced a lot, is operational aspects, which is not just to tell you that you have an alert, like what it is you're supposed to do with it. Is it important? Who can fix it? These are things I've been dealing with maybe 15 years. And I think before I was more focused on security operations, which is kind of the field of security that deals with the operational side, not just detecting something, but the operational side itself. And previously, as I worked in Simplify, I spent 7 years there. I was the first employee, kind of left right at Google took over. We kind of really focused on the realm of security operations, but more of a sides of detection and response. So some tool identifies an attack or a potential attack, and what do you do about it? And we've spent, 6 or 7 years building a lot of automation and process for that. And that is something that showed me a little bit of the importance of the operational side. And without it, none of the things you actually detect or any of the threats that could potentially be real are actually going to be done anything about, because no one is actually responding to them, because that's on the operations side. And I think we as I thought about Opus, we really thought about how do we think about this future of this. And as we start exploring, some through an experience in Simplify itself, some is here as we started thinking about it, we saw a big change in the industry in terms of what operations for security actually means, and we saw a lot of challenges. And the two key things I would say is that one, we used to think about security operations, you need to think about, as I said, an attack and how do I stop it. But today, with a lot of the cloud that is coming up and the kind of the proliferation of it all around, there's actually a lot more to say about how do I even prevent anything from happening. Because in the world of cloud, and you've seen multiple breaches or attacks like that just now, if you leave something exposed or some hole in your environment that it could be exposed by an attacker, it could be exposed, and by the time you detect, it's way too late. And you've seen multiple breaches like that recently. And that creates a whole level of operations around how do I plug these holes before anyone even attacks them. And that is something that is propagated, is now huge across the industry. And that creates a lot of problem around just what is operational sense? How do you do that? How do you do it effectively? When can you automate? And that becomes a huge issue that I think companies everywhere are dealing with. And the second part of that is, suddenly, the world of operations, the world of security has become a fully organizational thing. It's no longer this separate security team sitting in a room trying to resolve an issue when originated in the cloud. You're trying to plug a hole. Maybe you have a public storage that is exposed to everyone, that is dangerous, has maybe some confidential information. The way to resolve it is not through security. It's only the actual DevOps team and application teams inside the organization that can actually do anything about it a lot of the times. What actually creates a now security operation is not some room, it's the entire organization. That creates a whole new need for how security is done, a lot of new struggles for security to do as they try to collaborate and get buy-in and really work side by side with basically everyone else in the organization. And I think that's what we set out to solve with Opus.
And that brings us up to present day. And just to set the scene for today's conversation, can you tell me a little bit more about how cloud security, orchestration, and remediation is actually a new approach to remediation in the cloud? Because again, it's a big topic at the moment, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And I think the way we look at it is that we have built a lot of tools, great tools, to detect stuff. So cloud security as platforms in itself are pretty common. You know, companies maybe like Wiz, or some of the native tools by Azure or AWS, they're pretty prevalent at this point. So the world of cloud security, let's say, detection is really good. I think it's pretty successful and pretty widely adopted. But what we hear time and time again, talking to customers, is that as an industry, we've spent very little time thinking about, what do I do with this hole? So I know of the 100 things I need to do. Which one of them should I do first? And how do I do that? How do I actually fix that issue? And I think that's where we come in, and that's what we think about orchestration remediation, right? It's about, if I try to put it plainly, how do I connect or do sometimes between all the stuff that needs to be fixed and all the teams that are fixing it, right? And there's so many things that need to be fixed that are detected, and the teams that fix it is typically all the time DevOps teams. They don't speak the same language, right? So when I look about a specific cloud security alert that you can see, in some way that's almost not helpful for the DevOps teams to fix it. There's a lot of translation around what is the context of that specific finding. How do I fix it? Where do I fix it? Is it something in code or cloud? What is best practice? What should I fix the code to be? A lot of questions that are really around not just seeing the alert, but who needs to fix it? How do I fix it? And how can I do that quickly? And I think that is what we think about orchestration remediation. Orchestrate across organization, actually remediate issues. Inside of that, you could talk a little bit about some of the preventive measures as well. So we talked about the remediation as going through the organization and fixing it, but sometimes there's things that you just simply cannot wait. And we also help place automatic guardrails to really help you remove any serious risk immediately. For example, if I detect, or if two other tools detect that there is a cloud security or a public bucket, as we call it, or public storage that is exposed to the online or exposed publicly, and yet has some personal information in it that might be liable, compliant, or actually have data leak associated with this. We're actually able to allow you to put guardrails in to make sure that if such a thing happens, we automatically close it. So we do it much before, a long time before the attacker could actually get to it. And we help you, make sure the remediation is done, but also give you the time you need to do proper remediation to put, while actually enforcing guardrails to protect you from the most serious stress with that as well.
I was just going to say, from a business point of view, we're going to be a lot of people listening that are hearing about this approach for the very first time. So for those people listening, what are the advantages of this new approach when compared to, let's say, the more traditional methods?
Yeah, so I would say the first one is just better security. And I say that it sounds very vague. It's something that everyone says, but we want to think about, some tools just show you the situation, show you how bad you are. We want to show you how to resolve, how to make yourself better. So I think just by implementation, you will actually see significant improvement in your security posture, in your risk, and overall drive better security across the entire organization. That's the number one. The second thing is cost. So let's talk about what organizations are doing today. They are hiring more people to do manual things. They are struggling as they try to communicate across the organization and create visibility around that. So that should reduce and has reduced for our customers significant costs on the security side. They need to act like program managers a lot of times. And B, on the DevOps side, who now needs to do far less to impact security far more. And it is something that is truly significant. And I think I would say maybe two more things. One is just friction. One of the things we hear a lot today is that there's a lot of challenges in security trying to collaborate, trying to create a unified process with the rest of the organization. And we do a lot to help reduce some of those pains. Getting security, or getting the rest of the organization, more bought in, getting them more challenged, getting them to contribute more to security. And it's something we drive just by kind of implementation and bridging the two sides together. And the fourth is think about the organization. So when we talk about big organizations, they got it covered. If I'm a Fortune 100, I have all the people, I have all the tools, I'll figure it out in some way. But if I'm a little smaller, how do I get access to some of these best practices to actually protect myself? And we have seen tools or customers as big as 200 persons or companies that deploy our tool and see just as much value, and sometimes more, than the big organization. So we actually not just create the value, but make sure that its value is actually accessible to most of the markets, not just the ones who actually already have the tools or the money or the budget or the people to fix it.
And for the cloud security engineers listening, what does this approach mean for them?
So I think you need to think about a couple of things when you think about cloud security engineers. And the first one is what they're doing today. We see a lot of struggles today, or a lot of cloud security engineers all the time act like program managers.
Yeah.
Right. They have to look at 100 different findings coming from 40 different teams and start actually tracking and working. And we eliminate all that need. Right. So a cloud security engineer is not going to find himself to be a program manager or a scheduler or a project manager, because we do take most of the brunt of that work on our own and actually leave him time to actually do other things that might be more important. The second thing we do is helping create consistent guardrails. If you want to enforce a policy, an organization can have multiple clouds and cross multiple accounts and could be large. We help you do that in a click instead of going out coding one different one for Azure, different one for AWS. We make it consistent, easily use guardrails to enforce and make sure that the key risks are mitigated before they're even allowed to be leveraged. And lastly, it's just visibility, right? Today, most of the engineers we spoke to have some challenge in actually getting a sense of where they are. Are we doing better? Are we not doing good? How are the different teams working with me? Some are better than worse. Do I have critical risks that I'm not attempting? And we are actually able to create visibility to make sure that when they do spend the right time on this topic, they actually get the most important things they need to do first and spend their time in the best way.
Love that. And just to bring to life everything that we're talking about here, do you have any, examples or use cases of how Opus has helped enterprises mitigate risk by ultimately automating and orchestrating their remediation efforts? Are there any examples you can share around that?
Absolutely. I think there's typically, we have a bunch of customers, but I think there's typically two central use cases I can point to their customer work. The first one is improving some of the collaboration, productivity, and overall security by kind of connecting those security and DevOps functions. So a good example would be, there could be maybe 50 or 70 different findings or issues in your cloud security tools that could actually all could be traced to one single line in the infrastructure as code file, like a Terraform. So what we do is we don't just work with security. We work with DevOps to point to them to which are the key things they need to fix and make sure that the time they spend on security is the one that impacts security the most. So by implementing us and connecting those sides, we have seen drastic improvement in just how quickly does the organization actually bring security up and how engaged the other teams, DevOps mainly, are actually in security and driving better security for the entire organization. And that's kind of the typical one value. And the second value we typically see is around just automatic guardrails. So we're in places where organizations are complex or large or multi-cloud, and you want to set a rule that says, for example, if I have public storage with some personal identifiable information, I want it gone, whatever it is, whatever cloud it is, whatever environment that is. That could be something really challenging. Need some engineering work to do it properly across multiple clouds. We could deliver that in a click. So the segment of organizations that use us just to enforce the policies they need on the cloud to make sure that no critical risk exists whenever cloud they're using and whatever environment they might have.
And before you came on the podcast today, I was doing a little research on you, and I learned that Opus Security also emerged from a stealth with a $10 million in funding to revolutionize cloud SecOps and remediation processes. So for anyone that's not heard about that, can you expand on that funding round and ultimately what that funding means for your future direction too?
Yes, absolutely. So we are very privileged to get an investment by two really, really top-notch firms. Wild Ventures, they're kind of here in Israel and in San Francisco together, and from Tiger Global. I think those are probably two of the best VCs that I know. And we also had the privilege of working with a lot of different personal investors that are really, really smart and have done a lot, from George Kurtz, CEO of CrowdStrike, to Udi Mokadi, CEO of CyberArk, and many, many other security and industry leaders. They've kind of joined us and provide not just the funds, but also a lot of their expertise and a lot of the experience that they have. And I think that has been very, very helpful so far. What we want to do with that is essentially make sure that we can bring the market to this platform that we are already deploying with customers, but in a way that is very easy to implement. The most important thing we want to go is not just create the platform, but make it so organizations can actually leverage the value and be able to use the best practices, improve their own security in a way that doesn't take out significant investment or significant manpower to deploy, or anything to maintain over time. So I think that's really important. And two, we want to make sure that the value, that all the different processes you're looking for are going to be there. So we're going to use that to build out the platform. We're going to use that to make sure there's a process and best practices that can come out of the box with that platform in a way that can actually benefit most organizations. And we're doing it in a way that is easy to implement and make sure every single organization can actually benefit and work with us.
Well, we started the conversation today talking about your origin story, what put you on this path. And as we've come full circle, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned from your career in tech? Is there anything you'd pass down to somebody either entering tech for the first time or just starting out, or anything really? Is there anything you'd pass down that you've learned over the years?
Yeah, so I could say maybe two different things. I would say, first of all, I think I studied software engineering and kind of get through all the products, right? So I used to be product, or I came from product, but I originated from software engineering. And I think the first thing I always learned is we tend to focus on solutions just solutions. What do we build? What is a cool thing to build? And it's much more important to ask about the problems. Yeah. And I think what we've seen here time and time again, that if you focus on the problem, the actual pain that customers have, or you're trying to solve, in any sense, and you kind of bring in some of your vision and your own knowledge and your own kind of belief, then you're building something really great. But if you just focus on the issue, what you have in your mind, is some little fix, you're probably going to miss out a lot of the value and a lot of the change you want to make, right? So for me, it's always, and it's maybe a product manager and me talking, focus on the problem, not necessarily the solution you have in mind.
Fantastic advice. Absolutely love that. Now, you've shared so much with us today. I'm going to ask you to leave us with one other thing, and that is either a book that is important to you, inspired you, or you'd just like to share with everyone that we can add to our Amazon wish list, or a song that helps you get your head in the zone or means something to you that we can add to a Spotify playlist. All I ask is, what are you going to leave us with and why?
So I'm gonna go with a book, because I like books in a lot of ways. I spend a lot of time reading. I think my go-to for this type of question is Shoe Dog, which is a book by Phil Knight. Talks about kind of the creation and how our Nike got started. I think for me, it's just a great story of entrepreneurship. It shows the ups and downs, and shows that even one of the biggest brands you see in the world today actually struggled. It actually was almost not existent and has real challenges growing up, and still overcome it to become what we know today. So it's a very inspiring book for entrepreneurs, and I think it's a really good one. Also very well written.
It really is. And I'll get that added to our Amazon wish list. And for anyone listening that would like to connect with you, your team, or just find out more information about Opus Security and anything we talked about today, what's the best starting point for everything Opus?
I think probably the website will be the best one, which is opus.security.
Yeah.
And you can find any information there. Reach out to me, reach out to our team, and happy to have any conversation or tell more to anyone who is interested.
Well, so much I've learned from you today, especially around cloud security, orchestration and remediation, and this new approach to remediation in the cloud and how it's replacing antiquated, time and resource intensive manual processes. Fantastic. Learned so much from you there. And also it was great just to wash it all down with your inspiring origin story and leaving us with an inspirational book too. So thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Neil.
So rather than building processes from the ground up, cloud security, orchestration and remediation is alleviating latency and reducing risks by essentially providing teams with tried and tested playbooks based on extensive knowledge and best practices, which lets them focus on active threat mitigation across the entire organisation rather than building processes from scratch. And I think very often cloud security engineers, let's be honest, they don't have the bandwidth or the resources to manage that onslaught of security findings, let alone remediate them. And as risks grow, security teams are often left with manual, cumbersome processes that, yes, they have to build from scratch, but they're also unable to address the entire risk service in an adequate manner. And as organisations grow more distributed across multiple environments, security teams are no longer the sole stakeholder of remediation efforts, but they have no ability to collaborate with other departments, and they rarely know who they are or what responsibilities they own. There's so much I'm thinking about after this conversation, but you've heard from me, you've heard from today's guest, but what about you? How are you dealing with everything we've raised today? I'd love to hear more about your experiences. If you've got any questions, anything you want to share, or you want to come on the podcast, just email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, or you want to work with me or browse through 2,100 different interviews, drop by techblogwriter.co.uk. But that's it for today's episode. So I'll return again tomorrow with another guest, but just a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.